Evening, everyone. Apologies for the slightly late start. Welcome to the meeting of the Housing Planning and Development Scrutiny panel. Firstly, item 1, filming at meetings. Just want to draw your attention to the notice in the report pack that this meeting is being filmed. Item 2, apologies for absence. I've had apologies from Councillor Moeed and Councillor Williams. Those are the only ones I've received. Anything else?
Councillor Diakides has given apologies for lateness. It'll be about 20 minutes.
All right, so he'll be joining us soon. Third item, urgent business. I'm not aware of any items of urgent business. No, okay. Item 4, declarations of interest. Does anyone need to declare an interest? No. All right. Moving on to item 5, deputations, petitions, presentations, etc. Have we received any?
No, Chair.
Okay. Next item is approving the minutes of the last meeting. Does anybody have any issues with the minutes? Happy to approve those? Okay, approved. And now we'll move on to our first substantive item.
Matter arising from the minutes. I don't seem to have had a response to the inquiry about Brewery House. It's marked to be action by Susan Prothero. There's been no response.
Can you respond to that, Philip?
Sure, yeah. Find out. Let me chase this up after the meeting and I'll get you a response.
All right, I think we'll just note that again. Sorry that you haven't had a response yet, John. Yeah, I think you did request one, didn't you? Yeah, it's been requested. Okay, yeah, other than that, we'll move on. So housing strategy and policies programme, I think we've got Hannah Adler to introduce. So yeah, over to you, thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Worrell. So I'll give a brief kind of overview of the report provided to Housing Scrutiny. So as a reminder for everyone, our housing strategy 2024 to 2029 was approved by Cabinet following consultation and then ratified by full council earlier this year, and the kind of key objectives and kind of issues being dealt with in that strategy are set out in the report. I won't go over them since that strategy is now agreed. It was an ask of Housing Scrutiny to set out kind of the housing strategy and policy programme. What are we working on? What are we looking at? What's the rationale for that? So that's what this report is doing. I think it's worth noting, firstly, that the policies and strategies that we work on are a mix of statutory strategies and policies, things that we have to have in place as a local authority, as a local housing authority, and those that we see as important opportunities for the council in terms of kind of how we work going forward in the housing space, and also strategies and policies that respond to need, to kind of changes at the local or regional or national level, and things like that. It's a flexible programme, so it kind of again changes according to the needs of the council and needs of the borough. So yeah, that's just kind of a bit of a preamble. I'll just kind of quickly run through some of the kind of policies and strategies that we're working on. So I guess it's kind of fair to say we've got kind of 3 kind of quite big strategically important policies and strategies going through at the moment. Firstly, our allocations policy, which I believe we have discussed here, possibly at a kind of previous panel. So our allocations policy is coming to Cabinet towards the end of this calendar year. As everyone here probably knows, an allocations policy sets out who is prioritised for social housing, either council housing that we own and manage, or housing owned and managed by other registered providers that we've got nomination rights to. And we're in the process of reviewing our allocations policy at the moment. And as I said, that's coming to Cabinet soon for public consultation. The 2 other big strategy pieces that we as a team across the council are working on are our homelessness strategy and an older person's housing strategy. So the former is a statutory strategy that we have to have in place. And our current homelessness strategy is is actually due to be renewed, kind of should already be renewed, but there are kind of some good reasons why it isn't, which are kind of discussed in the report. Homelessness strategy is being developed using something called a homelessness reduction board, which is kind of generally recognised as good practice, and that board is chaired by Councillor Williams, and we will have a draft homelessness strategy going to Cabinet in spring 2025, and that will be a draft for consultations that will be kind of subject to public consultation before being coming back to Cabinet to be agreed by Cabinet. And the other kind of bigger strategy piece that we're working on is an older person's housing strategy. That's not at all a statutory strategy. There's no requirement for us to have one in place. Lots of local authorities won't have one in place. But for us, it was really important to be setting out what kind of housing we want to be managing, developing for older people in Haringey. We think there's both the kind of the opportunity to use the findings of that strategy to shape the kinds of housing that we want to either welcome others to develop in the borough, or we want to maybe develop ourselves as a housing developer. And also, I mean, we've got a kind of changing population, an aging population. We thought it was really important to think about how we meet their needs in the kind of housing space. And then, as well as those kind of three kind of, I guess, like bigger pieces, we've got a lot of policies in the pipeline. We've got a right sizing strategy and policy setting out how we can make sure that our social tenants in the borough are, as far as possible, living in homes that are the right size for them. Homes that are a lot of our tenants or tenants of other registered providers live in homes that are either too big for them or too small for them. What can we do to address that? There are things we can do, and that will be kind of set out in both the strategy, setting out our kind of vision for how we do that, and the policy setting out what we can do to encourage people to live in homes of the right size. We will be working on both a TA placements policy and a temporary accommodation placements policy and a temporary accommodation discharge of duty policy, both of which we have in place to set out how and where we place people in temporary accommodation, and how and where we discharge our duty for those households who entered TA post 2012. We'll be developing a supported housing strategy, which is now a requirement for local authorities to have, although the requirement to actually implement the supported housing strategy is still subject to kind of to guidance from government. We'll be updating our intermediate housing policy, which sets out various kind of income thresholds for people to access or to be prioritised for intermediate housing in Haringey. We'll, as part of kind of sitting underneath the older person's housing strategy, we'll have an allocations policy for our sheltered housing. And as well as that, it's worth noting that we are also currently reviewing all of the policies that we need to have in place as a landlord of social housing. So we've got a kind of whole suite of housing management policies, some of which have been coming, some of which have already come to Cabinet, some of which are coming to upcoming Cabinet meetings. So we had our responsive repairs policy coming to Cabinet in September. We've got two income management policies coming to Cabinet in October. I haven't gone into that in much detail in this report because it's a slightly kind of separate issue, although one that we're happy to provide an update to Scrutiny on.
Thank you. Yeah, a lot there. Does anyone from the panel have any questions to start off with? You want to, Tammy?
Yeah. Oh. There's a lot there. So I think just the first question was, you had mentioned the temporary accommodation, particularly the discharge of duty policy. And as it says in the papers, you can discharge someone either into the private sector or into the social sector. I guess I'm wondering, when it's like discharging particularly into the private sector, will that policy kind of outline the suitability of that offer? Because clearly there's the intentional homelessness aspect of it if someone refuses that accommodation.
Yeah, so I'll come in here, but it's also worth noting that Darren is in this meeting remotely, and this is kind of something Darren might also want to come in on. But yes, that's exactly what that policy would set out, which is what constitutes a suitable offer when we're discharging our duty into the private sector.
Yeah, I mean, just to say, it's worth noting that outside of any policies, there's statutory requirements and statutory guidance that we have to take into account and show that we've taken into account.
Darren, could I pause you there? Yeah. Sorry, our sound isn't turned up enough, so we're just going to try and adjust that and then have you start again if that's okay.
Yeah, no problem.
Can you hear us to a decent level?
Yeah, fine.
Okay.
There's nothing.
Could you say hello?
Hello.
That's a bit better.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Would you mind starting again, please?
Yeah, no problem. So, yeah, as Hannah said, that the policy would certainly have guidance about locally how we want to make sure that certain things are taken into account and how we would consider and prioritise them. But worth noting that outside of any policy that we have, whatever type of accommodation we offer people, there's a statutory requirement that it's suitable, and there's a statutory guidance about things we have to take into account and be able to show that we've taken into account when we make those offers of accommodation. And there's also rights of review and appeal so that people can, formally challenge those decisions. So there's quite a robust framework in place to ensure that we're making decisions fairly and appropriately.
Thank you. Did you want to come back? Councillor Bevan?
Right. I'm disappointed the cabinet member for housing is not here because I wanted to raise some really serious issues because there's some real problems in the housing service. I think parts of it are on the verge of collapse, which I will talk about later. But these 3 items I picked up from this report we're discussing now, which are mentioned here, but they're more or less related to operational issues. Now, you talk about rough sleeping. Every time I come out of Tottenham House Station, whatever time, day or night, there are rough sleepers all over the front of that station. Their tents and beds and bits and pieces are all over the place. It's constant. I'm not blaming them. I know they've got issues, but that is the gateway to Tottenham. Thousands of people use it every single day. What impression is that giving of Tottenham? You mentioned rough sleeping in here, so perhaps you could come back on that particular specific issue. Also, you talk about people who are under occupying being persuaded to move to smaller accommodation. And we know if that happened, we would solve all our overcrowding problems because the numbers match up either side. What action is being taken to help people to do that, to have mentors, to help them move and deal with all the hassle and all that type of thing? Because a lot of people would be reluctant to move purely because of all that hassle. So what are we doing about that? Have we got anything in place for that? Because that's mentioned in here as well. And then also you talk about a new housing allocation policy. When are we going to review the waiting list? Because we've got the 3 bands A, B and C. I remember many, many years ago, we decided to review the whole waiting list. We wrote to every single person on that waiting list, email or letter, asking them if they wish to remain on the list. And thousands didn't reply, either because they moved away or whatever. So how up to date is our current waiting list and when will it be reviewed?
Okay, so one of those questions was on rough sleeping. So we actually do have an up-to-date rough sleeping strategy that was agreed last year. It's not something that I worked on personally. It was led by another team, so it's not one that I really feel like it's not my area, so I don't want to talk about it in too much detail. But we do have an up-to-date rough sleeping strategy which sets out how we approach rough sleeping in Haringey. On your question about under occupation and what we're doing, so that is something that we are looking at the moment through the upcoming right sizing strategy and then the right sizing policy. So I guess the concerns that you've got would be addressed through the right sizing policy, and what we would set out in the right sizing policy is a kind of selection of incentives to support people to move into smaller homes when appropriate. At the moment, we offer cash incentives to people to move to a smaller home. We offer, I think it's £1,000 per bedroom they're giving up, as well as £1,000 just for moving to a smaller home, and I think it's £500 for the kind of hassle of moving, as it were. And we think that we probably need to offer a broader range of incentives. For some people, it's going to be cash. For some people, it's going to be support finding the right home. For some people, it's going to be help moving from having lots of stuff to having less stuff. For some people, it's going to be a specific kind of home. We don't know what that is yet, because we haven't yet done the work to work that out, but we're in the process at the moment of doing some engagement work with people who are living in social housing that is larger than they need, that we can understand from them what is it that might make you want to move to a smaller home. And obviously it's worth kind of stressing, I know everyone here knows this, but it's worth stressing that obviously all these people are living in secure tenancies and we cannot force them to move, but we'd like to be in a situation where when people want to move to a smaller home, they're being supported to do so. And on the kind of your question about the waiting list, I think was maybe a bit of an operational question that I might let Darren take, if that's okay, Darren.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, I mean, I don't think the housing register hasn't been reviewed in the very recent past. I think largely as a result of capacity, because it is quite an undertaking. What would make sense is to do that alongside the implementation of new allocation policy, because there's going to be changes to how priorities work, etc., potentially eligibility criteria. So you'd want to you'd have to go through the register and ensure that those applications are then aligned to whatever the new rules are going to be. And you would expect alongside the implementation of a big policy like that, that you'd have some temporary resources to implement that. So we're currently working on the kind of the implementation and the resourcing around implementing the allocation policy, but that's definitely something that we would aim to be doing alongside that implementation when that comes.
Well, just a few comments. I mean, what you say about the incentive, those incentives have been there for years. They're not much different to what has been operation for years. They haven't worked because you get hardly any people downsizing at all. So people need help. They need a personal mentor to guide them through the whole procedure. I'm not quite clear what was said because it's a bit distorted. But when we did the last check of the housing list, it was all done by email sort of thing. And people, if people couldn't sort of do email, we set aside times in the libraries where they could go in, talk to an officer and respond to, do you still want to be on the list? So I think you need to do that again. And with the rough sleeping, I mean, you're talking about your policy, but is someone going down to Tottenham How every single day and talking to those rough sleepers and getting them off of that site into proper accommodation and clearing away the rubbish that is there all the time?
So yeah, come in.
Yeah, I think it's worth saying we don't have anyone from the rough sleeping service here. So I think, Hannah's team are involved in in the development of the rough sleeping policy, but I think that's a question that we can certainly take back to the rough sleeping team. We don't have anyone operationally, representing the operational side of rough sleeping service here. On the incentives, I think we recognise that we're not yet in the right place on this, that the incentives are out of date and there's a lot more we can do. That's precisely why we're doing the work on the right sizing policy. We need to set out these incentives in policy. They're not discretionary things that we can offer. So I think, if you'll, I guess, bear with us to get the right policies in place, we can then very quickly start moving forward with, a lot more activity to help support people to downsize.
Thank you. So John, will take your question about Tottenham Hale and rough sleeping as an action from the meeting. Can I also ask, did you want to make your point about having in-person support with the housing register as a formal recommendation? Yeah, okay, we can do that. I'll go to Councillor Barnes next.
Thanks, Chair. I've got a couple of questions around the right sizing, mainly because I was surprised / shocked when a resident contacted me who'd been waiting for a number of years to downsize from a 3-bedroom property and was desperate to get out of it. So in terms of a strategy, what kind of staff will be allocated to manage that and to make sure those are dealt with in a more timely manner, because her home is obviously of extreme value to another family? Are there boroughs that we can look at for good practice in terms of the downsizing side of things? And is there any implication of the state of the homes on offer? Because if you're going to downsize from a house that's kind of okay to one that's a bit mouldy and rubbish, that's not going to help matters. And then my last question was around whether any of these strategies detailed here would come by this panel for any scrutiny at all before they go elsewhere.
Yep. So I think I've got all of those. So in terms of sorry, if we don't have, we should put that mic off because it's. Yeah, there's a mic on there.
Oh.
Yep, there we go. In terms of the resource that is allocated to supporting downsizers, I think we'd probably all say that it's not enough, and something that we would like to make a case for as part of a new right sizing strategy and policy is a kind of period of time where we have some much more dedicated resource towards that, because we know that the cost of helping someone move from their 4-bed home to a 1 or 2-bed home is far smaller than the cost of building a new 4-bed home to meet the needs of households on our housing register. In terms of what other boroughs are doing, yeah, we do look at what other boroughs are doing, and we know that some boroughs offer some really significant cash incentives, again based on that kind of trade-off of, this is the cost of building a new 4-bed home, so this is the kind of incentive that we could offer. So we are looking at what other boroughs are offering and bringing us as incentives, but we don't think we haven't done the kind of engagement work yet. We haven't completed that work, but we don't think it's going to be just about the cash on offer. We think it's going to be about other things as well, and we're waiting to kind of work out exactly what that is. And you would have to remind me your third and fourth question briefly.
Sorry, I wanted to know if there was any issue around the state of the homes that are on offer, and in terms of the boroughs to look at in terms of good practice, that's not just the cash incentive thing, that's a whole package, like who's doing it well that we can copy, and whether any of these strategies would come via this panel for scrutiny before going to wherever they go next.
So I guess on the kind of scrutiny point, it's probably one for Philip to answer, but we're happy to bring any policies or strategies to scrutiny that you'd like us to bring and to work on with us and to have a look at and support us with. And on the kind of homes that are on offer, well, any household who is currently under occupying their social rented home is automatically allocated band A of the housing register. So in theory has their pick of the homes that are available. Obviously, we know that people are more likely to want to move to a better quality home than a less good quality home, and we know that our housing stock isn't all of uniform quality. So again, I think there's something there about making sure that there is the support in place to help people move to smaller homes and help them navigate the homes that are on offer and help them find the home that they want the most and that is the most suitable for them.
I think some strategies would come to us automatically, like the housing strategy.
Housing strategy would have came here. Yeah.
So I think maybe the homelessness one would, but Philip, do you know?
So I think it's the policy framework documents, isn't it, that all council agree at the start of the year. So I think there's 7 of them. The housing strategy be one. I'd have to look at the report of full council to confirm it.
If there's any you're particularly keen on, we can ask for them as well.
I think it's worth saying we're happy to come to present whatever the scrutiny committee wants us to come and present.
Tammy, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I was just also to raise a point that was raised in this meeting before around split tenancies when it comes to downsizing and the possibility that some houses might want to have, a 1-bedroom and a 2-bedroom if they're currently in a 3-bedroom, because that can be something that, especially for young adults, can be something that's positive and freeing up larger capacity bedrooms. So I know that was something that Councillor Harrison-Mullane had raised before, and I think it would be good to keep that on the agenda for the new policy.
Thanks. Yeah, that is certainly on the agenda. Thank you.
Okay. I was going to ask something about house building, if that's okay. To pivot. Yeah. So yeah, obviously the London plan states that we're building 1,592 homes per year. Just to firstly ask, has that been affected by the recent announcements of changes to the NPPF proposed by the new Labour government?
I'm happy to come in on this one, Chair, if that's okay. So, hello, Rob Szosowski, Assistant Director for Planning, Building Standards and Sustainability. The quick answer is there's no immediate change to the housing target. What's been announced is just a consultation. So a change will be coming further down the line. And whatever target is concluded for Haringey and London would still need to be included in a London plan and that then sort of divvies out the housing target across the boroughs, and a target is then set for Haringey, which we pick up in the local plan. So even though you might see figures concluded for Haringey or London, there's still work that needs to be done in the London plan and the local plan to sort of formalise those targets. So it's got quite a bit more of a journey to go until a new target is brought in. And as it stands right now, the existing target is the existing target. They have not increased officially yet.
Okay. And with that target in mind, looking at the current pipeline in terms of both our delivery and delivery that's coming through private development, do we think that there is that projection is going to be met in the coming years, given what we know about current applications?
Yeah, really good question. So the last few years, compared to our current target of 1,592 homes per year, we've been meeting, if I give you the figures for the last 3 years, 2021, 22, 1,503. So that's actually quite close to our housing target. And this is completions I'm talking about, so actual completions on the ground. The following year was 911, so a bit lower than the target of 1,500, and then 23, 24, 1,189. So not too far off the 1,500 figure. So we're performing close to the 1,500 target per year. If that was to be increased, then obviously that would be a stretch, that would be a challenge. However, if we adjust policies to open up new sites, you've heard about the grey belt policy that's being consulted on, and other densification, then it could be possible to meet a higher target. And it's worth saying the London plan housing targets for each borough are set on capacity. So they have to be set on evidence of the capacity that exists in a borough. So actually, in theory, you shouldn't be able to set a target that is not achievable. And that's our job. We'll work through that with the GLA to make sure that a target is realistic.
It's worth saying this year should be a pretty good year, because we'll be handing over more than 500 council homes as completion, so that should help with the numbers somewhat.
Yeah, I guess, is it a question of capacity in the planning team in terms of getting through those applications when it comes to the private ones? Obviously, we're saying that social housing is looking good in the next year.
Whilst I would always want more capacity and resources for the planning team, that's not really the blockage.
Okay.
We perform very well in terms of turning around planning applications, and on the whole, most planning applications are approved. So I don't think planning is the bottleneck or the blockage necessarily. There's always more that can be done on sort of proactive planning, on local plan policy, so that we can draw red lines around sites and say we want development here. Yeah. But I don't think that is the major factor. I think the major factor at the moment in house building is the economy and the market factors that are at play, and it's a difficult economic environment out there for any developer, be it public or private sector.
Yeah. And just my final question on this. I know that places like Croydon, and I guess we do to an extent in parts of South Tottenham, have these like special design codes, which are like supplementary to the local plan, looking like very specifically at densification. Is that something that we're going to further explore in this borough in terms of supporting that densification work?
Yeah, so you're right to talk about, we have already the South Tottenham House Extensions SPD, which is a little bit like a design code allowing upwards extensions in a certain area. We don't have any plans to do anything else like that across the borough right now. The local plan is the main focus, so the local plan will have a sort of place-based focus, looking at the characterisation, the urban characterisation of the area to inform policies for that area, but it won't go into the detail of a design code at this stage. But once the local plan is completed, we could then turn our attention to design coding and expanding area-based upwards extensions policies and things like that. So at the moment, no immediate plans, but with a nod to that in the longer term from the local plan.
Thank you. I'm going to ask a couple of questions now, and then I'll come back to the panel. Just welcoming Councillor Diakides to the meeting, and we're still on the first item, the first main report. Sure, yeah. So just quickly going back to right sizing, I was wondering whether there is currently or there is intended to be an offer of support for people that want to move out of borough. So people that actually want to leave Haringey, you know, maybe it's older people wanting to move closer to their family or something like that. Because obviously that's another way of potentially freeing up some of our stock. And then similarly, how this interacts with or would it at all interact with those kind of home swap schemes, or is that always separate? Is this one for Darren to answer or Hannah?
Darren, feel free to go ahead and I can chip in later.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, in terms of out of borough, it is something that we currently do, and indeed it's that the incentive is bigger if people do, because we get more back in terms of the property, because we're not losing another one. We also have a seaside and country home scheme specifically for those that are interested, to help people relocate to different areas across the country. So, I mean, in general, I think the way to get more moves here is about just having a flexible offer. It's not necessarily about more. In some cases, it will be, but a lot of it comes down to the kind of the capacity that we have to handhold people through the process, understand what they need in order to make it work for them. Some of it will be practical support, some of it will probably just be reassurance. But I think it will be helpful to engage with you know, potential movers and understand actually what they need from us, rather than just giving something prescriptive. The other thing, just on the right sizing, I think the other thing we're missing a little bit is the level of promotion. I don't think it's necessarily something that we're promoting as well as we could be, and particularly, you know, what our offer is in that space. So I do think at the moment we've only got, I think, 10% of potential applicants on the housing register as under occupiers. So there's a big you know, pool of people that we're not gaining traction with at the moment, and we really need to kind of target more proactively. And your second question, sorry, remind me.
It's about the kind of existing home swap schemes and how our strategy will align or not with that.
Yes, I mean it does. There is some overlap. Obviously, if somebody's doing mutual exchange, sometimes that will involve you know, moving to a smaller property as part of that. But I think by and large, you know, they're separate generally, but there is some overlap, I suppose. We probably need to speak to the other sort of mobility schemes that are available, but it's not. I don't think it'll be a large part of the strategy going forward. But Hannah would be able to speak to it in terms of what she foresees in the strategy.
Thank you. So just to follow up, so right now, if I was a resident wanting to leave my home, my council home, and move into a different borough, who would I speak to about that? Which team would deal with that?
So if it was as an under occupation move, then we have an under occupation officer that helps people specifically. If it's more broadly a kind of mutual exchange, then it would generally be going to their kind of tenancy officer that would support them through that process.
Okay, thanks. I wanted to ask about the allocations policy. I know you're not going to be able to tell us exactly what decisions have been taken and what the proposals are, but I wondered if you could sort of outline what are some of the key questions that you're looking at, and what are some of the options and trade-offs that are going to be the sort of, you know, the foundations of the new policy.
Yeah, sure. I can start to kind of talk through some of those things. So in terms of the key questions, I mean, one of the big questions is kind of well, I mean, there are lots of key questions, there are lots of things that we're balancing in a new allocations policy. I guess one of them is meeting the housing needs of some of our residents who are in the most kind of critical need, versus the high cost of housing other people. So there's kind of like needs versus cost trade-off, which is quite challenging. There's a question of supporting kind of existing existing social tenants versus people who are not current social tenants and who are in need of social housing. That's another trade-off. There is a question of the extent to which we're supporting people who have been waiting a very long time on our housing register for a social home versus those who have been waiting less time, but maybe whose needs are somewhat, maybe we might judge kind of more pressing. I mean, those are kind of three big trade-offs that I'm thinking of at the moment. I mean, there's something around the needs of immediate needs versus long-term needs. So if we're housing someone in a 2-bed who is downsizing from a 4-bed, we're taking a kind of longer-term strategic approach to things as opposed to housing that household who needs that 2-bed immediately. So those are some of the kind of trade-offs that we've been thinking about and talking about. It's worth saying that the work to inform the new allocations policy was driven by a real kind of co-creation exercise with a small but representative sample of households from the housing register through some really dedicated kind of focus group work where those individuals who kind of represented sort of those different people on the housing register for those kind of specifically quite different reasons were put together to talk through those trade-offs and kind of talk through kind of how they should be addressed. So it was very much informed by that. And I don't know if Robbie, you've got anything more to say on that?
I think it's probably just worth saying that we are still we're not at a final stage of this policy. So I think if we did want to talk, it might be worth, when we have actually got a draft, it's something we could probably talk about in more detail with a dedicated session rather than as I think there's lots of things that we've got that we're probably 90% sure will be in it, but I think it's better once it's finalised to have that conversation.
Yeah, thanks. I think we'll definitely want to look at it when it's in a draft form. I think just interested in the emerging thinking as well. When I think with most of the sort of key questions that you've outlined, I can think of examples, but I was just wondering if you could say a bit more about existing social tenants versus prospective and how that's relevant to allocation. Because I guess, yeah.
So that will be a trade-off between, say, a household in temporary accommodation and a severely overcrowded household in social housing. So those will both be probably on Band B of the housing register. I say probably in case there could be kind of other reasons why they might have been pushed up to Band A. And that is a kind of very real trade-off that we have to think about. And at the moment, it's based on how long they've been on the housing register.
And I'd probably add also whether we would consider, overcrowded households from the private sector as well, and how we might ban that. So I mean, there's an array of trade-offs, some of which are financial, some of which are sort of equity and fairness points, and it's a very difficult sort of ground to navigate your way through, because there are the ultimate answer is we do have a severe shortage of housing, and changing the way that we allocate that housing won't change the fact that we will still have a severe shortage of housing. And so, certain groups will be better, will have a better chance of securing some of that severe shortage of housing. Other groups will have less, but ultimately that problem of not having enough housing will remain a problem, until we can get supply moving even more quicker than we're doing now.
Thanks. And then I'll ask Councillor Diakides in a moment. I just wanted to finally ask, just out of interest, because I think it's something that we don't discuss as much because of issues in housing services, but what were the state of our homelessness services when they were brought in-house? Because I'm not sure we've really discussed that on this panel. So it's mentioned in the report that was kind of the reason for the delay of, were they in as bad of a state as some of our other housing services?
No, I think it was more that we just wanted to wait until those services had been brought back in-house before we developed a new homelessness strategy.
So, but they were sort of pretty operational, and there wasn't that kind of same, bringing it from the Almo and then what have we uncovered kind of situation.
I don't think so, and I think it's really worth noting that our homelessness services, so that would be our homelessness kind of front door and other kind of associated services to do with housing demand were actually only moved over to the Almo in, I think it was 2015. So they had been with the council kind of fairly recently.
It's worth saying for a long time we were actually the leading borough in terms of homelessness prevention. We at the time of the Almo coming over, we weren't quite number one, but we were still upper quartile. If you look at, we've always had very large numbers of people in temporary accommodation, but actually the trend that you've seen, I guess, in Haringey is that actually went down by about 1,000 over the last few years and has stabilised, whereas you're seeing very large upward ticks in temporary accommodation elsewhere.
Thanks. Yeah, Isidoros?
Yeah, first, apologies for being late. I tried to follow, and I think I caught a lot of the discussion from the teams on my way here. I just want to focus on one particular issue and ask a question about it. I've got no doubt that in terms of discharging duty and all that kind of thing, we are covering all the legalities and we're perfectly legal. The issue is much wider though than that, whether we're meeting simply the minimum requirements. In the last,
Could you move a bit closer to the mic? Sorry.
in the last couple of months, in my ward alone, I had 2 cases of 8 people, tenants, living in a 2-bedroom flat. 2 different cases. All right. 2 parents, 6 children of different ages and different sex. All right. Now, both of them have been more than 10 years, more than a decade. There was one, I think, about 16 years on council tenants. They both tried to apply one way or the other. Both of them are below band A in different ways. None of them stands a cutting chance of being rehoused. For all the efforts, even people in band A, when I looked at it, not guaranteed how long it will take before they will get somewhere, and all that kind of thing. Now this is very, very big issue, quite problem, because even one ward alone in the last 2 months, there are 2 cases. I'm sure there are a lot more. I don't know how many. I want to say, do we try to address that issue by hook or by crook, find a way to solve it? Is the Housing Benefit Society a way of it? Is it some of our policies? For example, we have frozen and now demolished in Broadwater Farm something like 33 bedroom flats that could have been repaired and been used the last 6 years, one way or the other. Is that a factor why we are in that situation where 8 people in 2 bedrooms, and indeed the one of them, can I just say, Chair, I don't mind, the one of them, they have discovered serious mold in one of the bedrooms, so they can't use it. They're not even using that. So there are 8 people now in 1 bedroom in the living room sleeping on the floor. All right, and still we can't offer them a hope that they can be rehoused in the next few years. I'm just trying to put it just like that. Is our strategy addressing that rather than talking about simply meeting our minimum legal requirements, statutory requirements?
But if I can cover.
So I think
Robin.
I'd start by saying this is unfortunately how severe the shortage of housing that we have is. People who are severely overcrowded, that is overcrowded by 2 bedrooms or more, that will get you in band B. That is there's significant waiting lists even when you're in band B, and look, like I said, we can do so much through allocations, but ultimately allocations don't give you any additional homes. And so ultimately it's supply. And so, the council housing delivery program's really important. They'll, about 500 homes handing over this year will help. But, we are dealing with a, backlog of sort of historic proportions. And even, even when we deliver 3,000 new council homes by March 2031 that we're on course to do. I don't think any of us are under any pretense that that will solve it. We'll need at least another 3,000 and another 3,000. You know, it's you know, there is a lot of demand for us to fill. I think it is worth saying, you know, there are a number of other initiatives. You know, the acquisition of homes through, you know, for their onward lease through the Haringey Community Benefit Society has helped a lot. But, you know, in terms of, as a sort of supply to you know, homeless households in the borough, we're constantly, you know, we're looking to accelerate those programs as well. We've, you know, officers, you know, we've all been engaged in sort of further, you know, significant sort of what we call sprint work around seeing what more we can do in the supply space as well. And so, look, you know, we've got a policy which works out how we allocate the sort of limited supply that we have. But the only way we really deal with the problem that you've described is by upping that supply, and we're doing everything that we can to. But, you know, it is you know, we have a lot of demand to fill.
Now, fine, and we all appreciate that. We know the situation. It's not just Haringey, obviously, but yeah. But let me just pick up a couple of examples. I reported a house, 4-bedroom, I think, or 3-bedroom that we own on in the same street, by the way, that the one of the two families is, which has been empty for 3 years now, on the basis that it's a bit too expensive to repair at this moment in time, and we haven't done it. I reported it, tried again. Again, I'm told we're looking at it, etc. I don't know whether there are many like that. Secondly, we are aware that we have some difficulty on turning over vacated void properties. And it takes time. And we've got something like 300, 400 at this moment in time that are waiting to be done. How many of those could be 3 or 4 bedroom houses as well? I don't know. But we, in my book, I would have given huge priority on doing any property like this. And even if it costs £150,000 to do up that house, let's put it, because we are desperately needing a 4-bedroom house. You know, how come we allow it? You know, that kind of thing. So it's anecdotal, but I'm asking is, do we really take it so seriously that we say it's a high priority? This is tragic. Let's do something about it by hook or by crook.
I think I'll just probably reiterate Robbie's point around the lack of supply. So just to give you an example, if you are in band B in 21, 22, and you were waiting for a 3-bedroom, the average time it'd take for you to get a 3-bedroom would be 10 years and 5 months. Now, in 23, 24, that gap increased to 12 years, 8 months. So what we are seeing over a period of time is people are waiting longer, unfortunately, due to a lack of supply. You know, there is probably more we can do with the private sector, but equally, when you compare some of the local housing allowance rent offered in comparison to what the private landlords are seeking, there's an issue between, you know, what they're expecting and what the local housing allowance can cover. Although there was a revision in April this year, there's still a significant gap to attract private landlords to offer their private properties to the council for temporary accommodation.
Jahid, I wondered if you could just say something about voids, because I think even though, you know, we appreciate that there is just such a lack of supply, I think obviously doing everything we can do with our existing stock, you know, it at least then we know that we are deploying everything we have.
Yeah, so I think on the point of void, within our housing revenue account business plan, we would expect an average churn of about 1%, which equates to about 150 voids per year. So last year, we had a significantly higher level of void than we would like, but we've always been quite realistic in terms of clearing the backlog. So what we did say last year was we'd try and get to the 2% mark, which we did. I think what further complicates the churn in voids is some of some of the sort of policy positions we've taken, which we are reviewing. So we've got the neighbourhood move scheme. So that's just this year alone, we're expecting 200 new voice to come through just through the neighbourhood move scheme, in addition to the general churn that we see through our general needs stock. And that's 200 new voice that we wouldn't have got if we didn't have that policy. So it is important to look at things in the wider context. There is a secondary discussion around, the purpose and intention of that particular policy, which when originally formed was probably aimed at targeting people to encourage downsizing, but over the years we've widened the offer. So those are current discussions taking in place around what that looks like going forward, without adding additional pressure to churn properties around, which we've already got on the general needs side.
Thanks. Can I go to Tammy and then John?
Yeah, it's been, I think now, almost exactly a year since our housing repairs team took industrial action. As I understand, there has been no agreement to end that dispute yet, and further strike action has been threatened. I wonder if you could give us an update on where negotiations are.
I think with regards to industrial dispute, that is an internal matter that we're working through. But very broadly, the council has made an offer to members of the Red Book scheme. That offer hasn't progressed much, and there are clearly red lines between what Unite members are willing to accept and the council's position. Ultimately, the council's position will always be one where we certainly want to try and address the issues that they're trying to resolve, but ours will be one of equity and fairness for all council employees, and not doing anything specific to one set of group without applying that to all council workers. I think that's all I can say at this stage publicly, but internally those discussions are taking place, and we have every intention to find a resolution, but there's a number of blockages that we're unable to resolve at this stage.
Okay, just a quick follow-up. Has there been any consideration of taking the matter to ACAS for a further mediation between the council and the union? And my other question is, I understand that they were petitioning to remove the GLA good work kind of accreditation that Haringey has. I wonder if that has been something that's been raised with you or the team in terms of whether that accreditation will remain.
Haringey Council are already part of the GLA good work standard, and we're really proud of that particular accreditation. So there isn't anything I'm aware that would put that at risk. Sorry, what was your second question? Whether there's been a consideration of having a mediation with ACAS around the situation with the work. I think ACAS have been involved, but ultimately the council's position has been we have put an offer on the table to meet the demands of the workforce. Unfortunately, at this stage, that hasn't been accepted.
Councillor Bevan.
Yeah, on reflection, Chair, if you'd like to consider this before I go on to the issue that I was going to raise with the Cabinet member. Redoing the housing strategy, I think that's the ideal time to revise the housing waiting list. I think you should be writing to all those people, explaining it's 12 years for a bedroom and all this type of stuff, because you've got lots of people on there who think they're going to get something. And that, plus the thousands who have moved away and haven't had their name removed. So whether we should make some recommendation on that, but I'll leave you to consider that.
Yeah.
But the point I want to also go to, so I had a person phoned me up today at 12 o'clock. She was being chucked out of the travel lodge that she's been in for about 3 months. If you remember, at the last Scrutiny committee, I had the same thing happened. I had a guy walking around Enfield town late in the afternoon because he'd been chucked out of his hotel that the council hadn't renewed the booking. So, and it happened again today. Now, I managed to get that sorted, which is a miracle because that's really difficult to do. But what I've been made aware of, because we've got so many people in hotels now, all the bank cards that are used to pay for these bills are to the max. I'm told the staff are going around the council using other people's council spending cards because all your ones are spent up to the max. Now, I don't know if that's true, but that's what I was informed today. And when I work out the cost of what's going on, because we're paying for childcare as well for these people who are in hotels, we're paying for outside meals for all these people because they cannot cook in a hotel. My working out of the calculations is this is going to cost us nearly £1 million a year, and it's getting worse and worse and worse. So I don't know what recommendations we can make because, let's be quite honest, the repair service and the voids issue, it seems to have completely collapsed. It in complete disarray everywhere, and the hotel thing is a complete mess. People are getting chucked out because the council isn't renewing the bookings. They're not getting paid on a regular basis for the meal expenses. So this is the image and the impression that I'm getting from the residents that contact me. So I'm putting it all to you, basically.
Thanks, John. So there's a few points there. One about the use of hotel accommodations, the issue around the bookings, and then some points about the repairs service as well. Who wants to start?
I can. Yeah, Darren, do you want to
Yeah, I
start?
can start with the commercial hotels piece. I mean, firstly, to say commercial hotels, and by which I mean the travel lodges, are absolutely the last resort and the worst option that we can possibly use, and limit it to absolutely where we have absolutely no other option whatsoever. It isn't just about the expense, because obviously they are the most expensive form. It's also just the worst experience for people to be in those hotels. And depending on the availability of hotels, it is unavoidable sometimes that people have to be changed between different travel lodges. Again, that's an awful experience. So it's not something that we go to lightly. It's not something that we want to be in at all, and did until recently manage to get completely away from travel lodge bookings. We have now got, about a dozen households because we haven't had anything else at all to come through. There is an action plan in place around reducing B&Bs generally, and that does also include the use of those commercial hotels. But it is a challenge around supply, and it's a challenge that all London boroughs are facing. We're by no means the biggest user of that type of accommodation, and we are all fishing in the same pond. So I think that there is a need as part of the strategic work we're doing here, but also how we work with individual households, and how we, I think, as you said yourself, how honest we're being. We do try to be very honest in the messaging that we give. We do give the very regularly in our responses to members, but also to people that come to us directly, average waiting times, etc., the realities of where people might be placed. Because it's that sort of information that helps people make informed decisions about the right option, or the only option in some cases. That might not be the option that they came to us thinking that's what I want, but it might be the best option in the circumstances for them. So please rest assured, we literally are doing everything we can not to use those commercial hotels. I'm happy to take away, if you can send to me separately, the details of the case you're talking about, because I don't know the specific one that you're referencing, but I'm happy to look into that and come back to you with some further information about what's happened in that particular instance.
I might just come in and just put the sort of Haringey context and the London context. This is in part a national problem, and certainly a very large London-wide problem, in that the supply of rented housing, at sort of a level that the LHA can afford, has simply sort of, largely, dried up. And this is something that's affecting every borough to a greater or lesser degree. We are by no means an outlier in this. And there are some boroughs where they have much larger numbers of people in bed and breakfast accommodation. So I think we do just have to look at this. This is we are not an island. We are a part of London, and this is a London-wide problem that needs, well, London-wide and national solutions to help fix. We can do our best in our own context, but we will need the support of both regional and national government.
Well, I mean, I understand all that. I don't disagree with anything that you've said. I know the problem, but I think you've got an admin problem as well, because I think whoever's administering all this within your service, I think they are overwhelmed, because people are getting chucked out of hotels, and then someone phones in the afternoon and tells them, well, now you can go to this hotel. It shouldn't be left like that. They should be anticipating when the hotel booking ends and all that type of thing, and paying the meal money on a regular basis. So that's my issue. And the fact that I was told all your bank cards are all used to the max, and your staff are going round getting bank cards off other council employers so that they can pay for hotel bills. Now, this sounds a bit fantasy, it just sounds a fantasy to me, but that's what I was told. So whether it's true or not, but that doesn't show an admin team on top of the whole operation, does it?
It's not my service. I don't think it's Darren's service that's directly involved either. I think it's something that we'll probably have to take away and come back with an answer on, because I don't know, Darren, if you've got anything more to say about it, but it's certainly not something that I'm aware of.
Yeah, I mean, what I would say, and it does fall within my service area largely, at the moment at least, is that we did have a short term, by which I mean the last couple of days, difficulty because of essentially the person that would normally have been booking them is no longer with the council and is not available. But that's absolutely been resolved now, so there shouldn't be any further issues around availability of cards.
Okay, we'll get a further written update on that from the relevant people. Thank you. Just a final one before we move on from this item. I just wanted to touch on intermediate housing and to ask how much discretion we really have over that, in terms of making sure that options like shared ownership do actually benefit people on kind of average incomes, because I think there've been quite a few reports of how often when it works in practice, they're still quite restricted to relatively high incomes. So how much of that is set by other levels of government, or how much of that can we control?
I think we're obviously in the process of drafting a new intermediate housing policy. I mean, there are certain maximum, there are certain maximum limits on income that are set through funding. So, for example, on intermediate rent, that'll be up to £60,000 income for the household. On shared ownership, that'll be up to £90,000 income on the household. Like we can set thresholds that are lower than that, and I think we sometimes do. Ultimately, though, when it comes to the planning process, there is often a conversation about can they find can you find the people who are able to take up that shared ownership, take up that intermediate rent at this who can afford it at the levels that we've placed it. Well, I don't know, Rob, do you want to comment a bit about the practicality of when it gets into the planning process?
Yep, happy to come in on that. So planning policies on intermediate housing are set out at a national level in the National Planning Policy Framework, and also at a London level through the London Plan. And both of those do have some degree of support for intermediate housing. So we have to be in accordance with the national and regional policy. So to some degree, we can't control that. We have to follow the national and regional approach. And we have our existing adopted local plan that we have to follow at the moment. Saying that, all of those three things are changing at the moment. So that's where our degree of control is to change at the policy level. So the National Planning Policy Framework is being changed by the current government. And in fact, they have explicitly amended the NPPF to have a greater focus on social housing and less focus on affordable home ownership, which is intermediate housing. So that is being changed at a national level. So that's an area of control. The London plan will go through another review in the next few years. So that will be looked at again. And as you know, we're working on our new local plan, and the evidence for our local plan to justify that is the strategic housing market assessment, which was done jointly with our housing colleagues, looking at housing need in Haringey. And no surprises, the conclusion on that is there needs to be a focus on social housing. Saying all of that, though, there's always going to be a place for some degree of intermediate at the right level. So it's never going to go completely away, but we do have control through those sort of national, regional, and local mechanisms.
Thank you. I was going to draw the item to a close. Try to be brief, please.
I'll try. Look, first of all, I don't think anybody here would want to blame or to make difficult the life of officers where we know the situation is impossible that you deal, and it's very stressing. All right, let's take that for granted. But we're talking about strategy, housing strategy, and there are certain urgent issues. I concentrated a bit on the overcrowding issue, you know, that kind of thing, etc. I had discussions before, even before I came to the meeting, about looking at the how do we use better incentives for the over occupation or under occupation, you know, to moving the kind of thing. We refer to the voids, we refer to the community benefit society. I referred briefly to the temporary use of assets earmarked for future regeneration of one kind or the other, all that kind of thing. Now, why all these things? Looking at this strategy, it doesn't seem to these things have come up. Why should it take until now? These incentives, for example, etc. You know, why can't we say it's unacceptable, we've got to break away? Why we're not lobbying much harder or even going out in the streets about it to get, if it is a government or a GLA issue, that kind of thing. It's an issue of a priority. This is a strategy, it's a priority. Is it a priority? If it is a priority, how can we accept it? How can we justify not having done all the things that we could have done a bit more? You know, that kind of thing. So sorry to make that point, but otherwise, it's just a chat now. We finish, no impact whatsoever. But I do think it's a real issue, this one. It's a real tragedy. Yeah.
Well, I think some of that's a question to the cabinet member who sadly isn't here, but yeah.
I can, in terms of the seriousness that we take it, I mean, a number of us, you know, spent a whole, you know, about 3 months ago, crashed our diaries, spent a whole week together to work out what we could do, you know, in this space. And there is a whole plan of action that we are working through and starting to action. So, for example, one of those things which, you know, my team are responsible for is we're looking to double the number of acquisitions that we've been making. You know, so which is, we're securing the funding. We're now working through, you know, the acquisitions team are acquiring properties for onward lease to the Haringey Community Benefit Society. Quite an astonishing rate, actually. You know, we're getting, you know, through around about five a week coming through at this point in time. Similarly, I know that in Jarhead service, you know, there is a lot of action to, you know, to make sure that we're doing everything that we can to clear the voids. We bring on new supply chains. We are going back, you know, looking at some of the homes that, you know, that had fought, you know, for example, at Love Lane, which we had sort of, you know, when we thought the demolition was coming sooner, we'd left. We are now looking to bring those back into use. So we are also looking at places where we may be able to convert existing buildings into housing. We are looking at where we might be able to offer sort of, you know, new temporary modular lodges. You know, there is a wide array of activity going on. And so I don't want the committee to think that this isn't something that we're taking seriously. We are straining every sort of bit of what we can, you know, do institutionally to meet the challenge, because it's a huge challenge. But, you know, all of the solutions that we've talked about do take time. You will see results. but they, it's not something that's an overnight fix.
Thank you. Thank you. So I just want to finally say to the panel, obviously, we've got a sort of overview of lots of different strategies here and that are coming forward. We don't actually have an agenda item on this meeting about future work plan. I don't know if that's because of we've just had the Scrutiny Cafe and we haven't been through that yet. But I think this might be an area where there are things that you want to bring back for a detailed look when they're in more draft form, or there's the possibility of choosing one of them for a scrutiny review. So I just encourage you to think about that, and maybe we can have a separate discussion after this meeting if there isn't time at the end of this meeting. So just moving on to the second substantive item now. So it's about HRA capital governance, and we've got Christian to introduce the report, please.
Thank you, Chair. This is a set of slides designed to provide an overview of how projects both in investing and refurbishing in our properties, but also building new homes, the governance structures and the monitoring arrangements that we have in place. The first slide covers how the board structure works and how it feeds into the cabinet, with the cabinet being the ultimate decision maker. And then it provides an overview of how we structure delivery based on a methodology that's used by the RIBA. And then it talks about monitoring arrangements, which differ slightly, and the gateway processes differ slightly, but it gives you an overview of where the key decision-making points are and the monitoring arrangements that we have in place, both within refurbishment and with new homes.
So are we taking the presentation as read, or were you going to go through it?
I can, which of you prefer?
I think maybe if we take it as read, because yeah. So I think the main thing I was interested in is if you could just give a bit more detail about, because of the challenges that we have in the HRA, and the choices around what projects go ahead essentially and when things are not viable. Could you just talk a bit about how those decisions are made and what is kind of guiding the prioritization there?
Yeah, if I talk about the refurbishment and then Robbie will talk about new homes. So refurbishment, if you remember at the last scrutiny panel, we went through the asset management strategy, which dictates how we plan and prioritise our investment based on information available and working within a budget envelope. So that's how we do it. We look at our stock data and other information to identify and plan how we're going to invest based on a set of priorities, and the priorities will therefore determine where we stop. Starting at health and safety and our regulatory responsibilities, which is pretty much all that we can do at the moment based on our budget availability. So that's, and I think we covered that at the last session. Robbie.
So it's a slightly different approach to new housing because it's new stuff. So what we'll tend to do is, in terms of financial metrics, we'll have the main financial metric is a positive net present value, which I'm trying to work out how to explain. It's essentially looking at the value of the cash flow that we get from the housing and discounting that back against the rate that we borrow. And so what a positive NPV essentially means is that we're getting in more money than we've borrowed for a scheme to go ahead. Other indicators that we also look at are whether it's net cash positive in the first year. So if in the first year after we've built it, we're getting more money from the rent from the homes than from building them. And the most recent indicator that we've actually now introduced is, as well as an affordability metric, we've also started looking at value for money as well. So we are now looking at our schemes against each other, and we are saying, unless there's a really good reason, that if there is a certain price point in price per square metre, which moves as the market moves, that we would deem as not acceptable for a project to go ahead.
Does anyone else have any questions, or I can continue? No. So I suppose what I'm trying to get at is like, how are you balancing the financial limitations and the need for viability and the need for you know, us to be getting a return that makes the HRA viable against our kind of, I guess, like the financial versus the political decisions, and the fact that we have this drive to deliver as much social housing as we possibly can, the fact that we have this drive to build new homes, and also on your side, the fact that, you know, there's such a huge emphasis on compliance and how important that is. Do we find ourselves in situations where sometimes options have to be taken forward that are less financially easy or sensible, and how do we approach that?
Look, I think there are we have a framework in which we make our decisions. That's not to say that anything that falls out ultimately, you know, that there are, you know, decisions about our stock are made in the full context of, you know, what we have to do. There are some schemes that are more expensive for others and are prioritized, you know, but I would say overall, the vast majority of our housing delivery program is prioritized in that way, and there are very few schemes that get through without being a positive NPV. In terms of how we put together the financial plan, you know, we've all been working very closely and spent far too much time together recently in this, and I think what we're looking to do is what we see really clearly when it comes to the capital allocation within the HRA is there's two things that we sort of take as read, even though it makes it quite difficult to plan. The first is that if we stop whilst we might try and reduce some of the costs through value engineering and getting better at procurement and all the rest of it, the housing delivery program, we know that ultimately the housing delivery program is really important for the financial sustainability of the HRA because it continues to grow our income. Equally, just from a purely financial standpoint, not ignoring the sort of human, regulatory, and all sorts of other reasons why you would invest in your stock. From a financial perspective, we know that if we don't invest in our stock, that means more repairs, which means higher revenue costs, and so over the long run, also negatively affects the bottom line. So that, we know that we have to do both. We know we have to do both at scale. I think what we spend a lot of time working out is at what speed, at what pace can we afford to do things? How might we be able to find savings whilst delivering the same outcome? And so that's the activity that we're engaged in really on the capital side at the moment. And then there's probably some revenue savings that we need to find to make sure that we can afford our capital program. But I think the priority from a strategic perspective has to be to prioritize that capital and make sure that the homes that our residents live in are the quality that they need to be, but also that we've got those new homes that are desperately needed in the borough as well.
Did you want to come in?
Well, I think I would just probably add to that. So we've just completed our stock condition survey, and our survey shows we need around 1.2 billion investment within our existing stock. What we've got over that period is just over 600 million. So given the funding gap, what we have to do is always prioritise how we spend and allocate our money, which is why when we got the revised asset management strategy agreed at Cabinet last year, we set out a list of priority, which is we'll always make sure our buildings are safe, as well as compliant from a fire perspective. We'll carry out the necessary plan investment work and ensure we're meeting our decent home standard. I think one of the things that we are looking to do, we've got a certain portion of our capital money allocated to do net zero work. So going forward, we'll be looking to revise potentially what we had previously allocated for net zero work in order to fund essential works to our buildings that previously had not been factored in.
Councillor Bevan?
So where are we with the procurement framework that's been ongoing for quite a number of years? Because that will produce huge efficiencies and speed rather than having to go out to procurement for every single contract individually, which is a complete nightmare. So I'm assuming the framework has still not been completed, because that's the answer we get every single time, the answer we've been getting for years. So where are we with that framework?
The council decided that in order to list to let the partnering contracts, we were to use the newly procured London, the LCP framework, which is a council framework. So that has been let and contractors have been awarded and notified. We are due to go out to start the procurement in October on that basis. It was due to have started earlier, but because of various reasons that necessary for the council, they decided to put it through the LCP, and that's why it's been a slight delay, but the doc is due to go out in October.
Sidoris?
Just to confirm something, did you say that after the stock conditions survey, the estimate is 1.2 billion needed for repair? As a rough calculation, that is nearly £400,000 per flat. Isn't it a bit excessive? Is there a mistake?
So it wouldn't be per flat, it'd be for the entire block, for example. So it'd be, we wouldn't be spending 400,000 on each flat, but it would be component replacements on a building as well as internal works.
£400,000 per unit. 400 average. Are we serious here?
So I think when you do external works like roof replacements or external replacements to windows, lift replacement, front entrance door replacements, they are quite costly in comparison to, for example, kitchen or bathroom replacement, which you would expect to come in a lot lower.
I'm sorry. I'm maybe retired, but I'm an architect, I'm an engineer, and everything like this. I've seen the inflation, I've seen everything like this. This is extraordinary. I would suggest that needs looking this a bit more. I think these estimates, because they're very damning, these estimates, because they have implications then on how we plan for the next 20 or 30 years, our HRA and everything like this. If we tie these resources on that, but also if it was accurate, then we certainly need to look at our procurement policies. Absolutely.
Completely acknowledge the point you're making. Unfortunately, we don't believe the procurement process will help us fund the gap that we've got, which is why we've had to ensure when we identify blocks that need capital work, it's done on a list of prioritization and urgency.
I don't know how possible this is, but could we get a bit more detail about what's behind that 1.2 billion figure?
So we could provide some additional information on how that's been calculated. It relates to the Robbie was talking about earlier and Jahed about the 30-year plan and how we're going to plan to invest over a period of time.
No.
I should say. Well, Isidore, are you just dividing 1.2 billion by the number of council homes that Haringey has? But I don't. That's not
need anything. They are new ones. They're better, etc., etc. Some of them they will need a bit more. All right, I agree with that. But these are outrageous figures.
I think just to give you an idea of where this year we're doing 2 big blocks. The block refurbishment cost is in the range from 10 to 13 million per block, and that isn't and that would be a fairly competitive price coming in terms of the tenders we've received.
Okay, thanks. I wanted to ask, obviously our next meeting will be well, no, one of our next meetings in November will be budget scrutiny, and so we'll get the kind of HRA position. What level of detail are we able to get in terms of any capital projects which might have been reduced or removed or reprofiled?
We can take you through all the detail about how the numbers have changed when we've got a proposal. We're still working through the proposals with Cabinet, but you know, it's still quite a tight environment for the HRA. I mean, the HRA is constrained. It's nowhere near as constrained as a general fund, but you know, there will be a number of actions and mitigations that we'll need to take to keep it in balance. But overall, you know, we don't feel that the sustainability of the HRA is under threat. It's just something that we need to constantly manage.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, just because I think the detailed breakdown of capital projects is maybe something that in general in budget scrutiny is a little bit less detailed. So it'd be good to have that in as much detail as you can feasibly give for this.
I could give you a list of every single housing delivery project and the exact phasing of every single housing delivery project if you wanted that, or I could give you, you know, the overall phasing and how many homes it equates to. I think Christian could probably talk through a bit more on the major project side.
We did present at the last scrutiny panel on the planned programme, and we could obviously provide more detail behind that.
Thanks. Any further questions from the panel?
Well, just to say, if you divide that 1.2 billion by 15,000, which is a really rough estimate, it comes to 80k per property.
I'm trying to figure it out. It was just a brief question. Obviously, within the procurement framework, was there any consideration about setting up a company or a works kind of new build company that would do some of that work kind of more in-house, or was that an option that was considered during that process?
Robbie will talk about a new build. For planned investment, generally, because of the range of activities that we've undertaken and the specialist nature of a lot of it, and the needs to guarantee it becomes a monster that you have to feed. So therefore, that we probably it wouldn't be viable for repairs and other areas. There is that benefit to do it, but we might be doing all roofs one year and then all kitchens the next year, and you'd have to have different trades that wouldn't be working from year to year. So it's more complicated.
I think on the new build side, given that contractor margins at the moment run about 3 to 5%, I think we'd be taking on a lot of risk to have a directly employed workforce. And one of the things that we are exploring is how we might manage more of the packages ourselves and bring those packages together so that we can get more value out of our supply chain. But I think there are not many developers in the UK who have their own workforce. There's a couple, but they generally started out as contractors. I think it would be quite a risky place for the council to go in terms of new housing development.
Councillor Bevan, and then we'll wrap this up.
Well, just on that point, I mean, to be quite blunt, it would be ridiculous if every council set up its own building operation, because it could never process and supply a continuous stream of work. But what should happen is the GLA should do it, because London-wide, if they were doing it, they could actually more or less set up a constant stream of work throughout all the London councils. And I know they have talked about that. It has been mentioned and it's been in the press, but that one's some time ago, and I think it's all died a death. But there's no way individual councils could manage that type of building operation.
Do you know anything about the GLA's plans there?
I've never been aware of them and having those plans, but I mean they may have done many years ago. But I know that at one time there were some conversations about whether or not potentially the GLA or councils could come together to own a factory. But I think if you were to see the public sector enter that supply chain. I think it would be very much around sort of, a factory built product rather than sort of a direct workforce, because, there is so much inherent risk in us taking that on.
Another quick point is that whilst we might not employ people directly, we're promoting the use of local supply chains, so local subcontractors, to generate income within the borough and promote apprenticeships and developments that way. So it might not be direct, but we are looking at that.
Finally, sorry, I said I was going to wrap it up. Just you mentioned about social value as now being one of the oh no, it was value for money that you mentioned as now being one of the things that you're kind of considering in these equations. How much is the social value of what the contractors are offering, and also, what the development itself will bring to the borough being included as part of the equation around value for money?
So when we go out to tender, we 60% quality, 40% price. Of that 60% as quality, 10% of the scoring's on social value. So it's a decent chunk of what we score on. In terms of when I was talking about value for money as a comparator, that was more, I was saying that we'd expect our build costs to be in line with where the rest of our projects are, and so like all, we call them hurdle rates, right? The reason we have hurdle rates is so we have a very clear idea about what sort of good looks like in a project. If there was a particular value that a project is bringing to the borough, we might sometimes take a more relaxed view, but they're there to make sure that 9 times out of 10 we have a rule that projects follow, which makes sure that our plans are financially sustainable.
All right, thank you very much. We'll draw this item to a close. So should we just have a 1 minute, 1 or 2 minute comfort break, and I'll adjourn the meeting very briefly, and if Tammy wants to give out some cake, she can. Back in 2 minutes. Okay, meeting back in progress. Please can we move on to the placemaking update from Anna and David?
Thanks, Chair. We've just prepared a few slides to introduce the item. So just to take you back, placemaking was last discussed at Scrutiny early in 2023, and this focused on our placemaking approach, as you can see on screen, in terms of our objectives and priorities, and also our joint working with planning to embed in the emerging local plan. Wood Green Voices had just been carried out, which was a strategic engagement exercise which would lead on to shaping Wood Green and will be published later in April 2023. The report also flagged our upcoming work in Tottenham, leading towards Tottenham Voices, which was a similar engagement exercise, which was really about embodying the Haringey deal in our approach to placemaking. And our key approach was covering two main areas, which, sorry, my slides have gone, which was expressing how we would embed the Haringey deal in our placemaking work. So that's really about working with our residents, sharing power and ensuring that the placemaking work we're doing is really benefiting our local communities. And then also setting out the high-level priorities and objectives which would guide the work to make sure it was delivering against a large number of cross-cutting aims, which taken together would make for good placemaking. So as mentioned, Shaping Wood Green was a really early example of the Haringey deal, and that was carried out late in 2022, and it gave a range of people, residents and partners in our community a chance to give their say on Wood Green. There was a number of targeted workshops, and it was really about hearing as many voices as possible. This resulted in Shaping Wood Green with 6 themes for change: making Wood Green a welcoming place, culture at the heart of Wood Green, putting the green into Wood Green, living well, making it North London's town centre for all and an economy to benefit everyone, and 5 key placemaking areas around the cultural quarter, our library sites, Station Road sites, the Civic Centre and the High Road and Turnpike Lane. Taking our placemaking programmes forward, there's a real focus on Wood Green Central. There's a major work stream, which is to bring forward detailed strategy work around our council-owned sites on Station Road, as well as the heart of the High Road, which includes the library. It's really the sort of most significant opportunity we've got for placemaking in Wood Green. It's about that major transformation opportunity for the town centre. There's also complementary improvements that are being delivered in Wood Green right now. So there's improvements to Turnpike Lane, there's delivery of the Rising Green Youth Hub, a range of public realm improvements and improvements to green spaces like Page Green Common. We've also been working with businesses and other partners like the Wood Green Bid to help boost the local economy, support the high street and try and provide more affordable workspace. Then there's support for the creative community around existing activity in the cultural quarter and putting a focus on Wood Green at the London Festival of Architecture through a range of talks and walks. Tottenham Voices followed Wood Green Voices, and we sort of built on the early work that we'd achieved with Wood Green Voices. We reached hundreds of people and many people that we hadn't reached before. There was a real focus on how we could talk and work with young people and kind of get them really involved in shaping the next strategy for Tottenham. And that resulted in Shaping Tottenham, which was adopted by Cabinet earlier this month. And there's 5 key placemaking themes there. So that's identity, culture and representation, strong, resilient communities, health and sustainable neighbourhoods, safe and welcoming, inclusive and prosperous economy. And in terms of some of the place-based area work, I think Tottenham Hale's a really great example of how the council's delivered on its ambitions. There's over 3,000 new homes and over 40% of them are affordable. It's across all tenures. There's been a lot of investment in parks and green spaces, including around 9 million in Down Lane Park and also the Paddock, which will be a nature reserve, hopefully. There's been major streetscape and public realm works, and it's a really good example of that public-private partnership delivering what local stakeholders have asked for around Wellbourne Health Centre, which has opened recently. In Seven Sisters, West Green and Bruce Grove, we've been working with partners like Places for London. There's key projects opening Seven Sisters Market, which will hopefully open as a new temporary market next year.
work to deliver a vibrant town centre. There's an example up on the slide of the new waiting room at Bruce Grove Station, which can also be used for community groups. There's been public realm work. We're working on Your Bruce Grove, which will include extending and improving Holcombe Market, which is used by lots of local people. There's Heritage Action Zone funding, which has gone into St Mark's Church, and more investment in green spaces such as Page Green Common and refurbishing workspace at 639 Enterprise Centre. In Northumberland Park, we've developed a community placemaking plan with the community, and that includes 4 pillars that we're focusing on. So there's a homes and places strategy, safe and sound, community space services, and job skills and training. We've opened up a new partnership forum, which is meeting regularly. There's new public realm work, which is finished around the station, a playground at Summerfield Grove, and a new street gym at Kenneth Robin House. Selby is a really key project for the team. We're working towards a planning application, which will be hopefully submitted early next month. That will deliver over 200 new council homes and a range of sports and community and recreational facilities. And then we have High Road West on the Love Lane estate, which will deliver over 500 council homes and 3,000 jobs through end use. In terms of the funding streams that we have available to us, there's a wide range of them. So we get funding from grant funding, also developer contributions through planning, and then there's council capital funding, which comes both through the general fund and also the HRA, and a small amount of revenue funding. There's obviously been a lot of reductions over the years and increased pressure on budgets, which means that particularly the revenue funding is lower, and it's also difficult to access as much grant funding, but we're doing everything we can to work with grant funders to have more available. There's a variety of funding sources. A lot of them are outlined in the report, but if Scrutiny would like to see specific conditions on any of those programmes, they can be provided, although a lot of it is already in the public domain through key decision reports or published delegated authority reports. I think the challenge around large placemaking projects is that delivery often changes. So we have a really good close relationship with our funders to make sure that we can kind of mitigate some of these issues. And probably it's important to note that viability is also reviewed at key gateway stages. So before that we enter into contracts and we're committed. Thank you.
Thank you. Dawn?
Thank you. I just wanted to talk a bit or ask some more questions around the Tottenham side of things, because relationships with the local community there haven't always been fabulous between the council and the community. So I noticed that Seven Sisters Market is in there, which used to be Ward's Corner, and the Latin Market and so on. So have things improved? Are the community coming along and happier about how things are progressing? And are there many changes to older plans, perhaps, that may no longer go ahead? And is there more community work going on to make sure that local people are happy with the proposed regeneration, which quite often gets called gentrification and isn't terribly popular?
Answer that one.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, so we spoke a bit about shaping Tottenham, which is our new strategy. I think that's really important because that was really developed with our communities and key stakeholders, and so it felt important that they had their input, and there was a variety of kind of workshops where we kind of did that across a number of key areas. In Tottenham Hale, there's been a huge amount of change over the last 10 years. There's a number of community groups that we sit on, stakeholder panels, and I think there has been a lot of change. I think what I'm sort of hearing back from the communities, I was speaking to the Ferry Lane estate today, for example, is that I feel that we're at that kind of stage of delivering on those public realm improvements with the Wellbourne Health Centre that's been opened recently, which was a key desire from the community, and seeing the work that's being done to Down Lane Park. I think that's kind of really shifted people's opinions about the work that's being done. They're kind of seeing it come together. So that's really positive. In relation to the Latin American market, we've been working with and supporting Places for London on that. There's been quite a lot of delays. And I know that that's been really difficult for the community. There's been sort of hardship payments that have been paid to stallholders, and the council's been kind of regularly meeting with them and supporting them during the process. There's a new contractor that's been appointed on that, and they're outlining a new programme of works, and we're hoping that that will be opened again early next year.
John?
I've got a few points here. Well, I do congratulate you on the Wellbourne Health Centre, because when you drive past it, it looks fantastic, and down Lane Park as well. But so my concerns are, I mean, Seven Sisters Market, you talk about the local community. That's another gateway to Tottenham that is an utter disgrace, and it's been like it for years. The local community want that eyesore sorted. There may be some traders who don't want it sorted in the way that would make it a really iconic entrance to Tottenham. But I'm just concerned, this project's been ongoing. I don't know how many years this project has been ongoing, and it's actually got nowhere. We cannot allow a local group to derail it in future. It needs to progress. So that's that point. So also on Bruce Grove, the railway arches, I read in some cabinet papers that the developer, so this property company brought all the railway arches off of Network Rail throughout the UK, and the ones at White Hart Lane Station have been refurbished without any council money. I read in some council papers that this developer has approached us to get funding to restore those arches at Bruce Grove Station, which basically I think is totally outrageous. They brought all that stuff off of Network Rail. They knew the conditions that they were buying it, and they're approaching us to help them to refurbish it. I personally think that's totally wrong. So that's that. And then going on to High Road West. Now, you haven't mentioned anything about Lend-Lease. So Lend-Lease has now walked away. We haven't been told much, but that contract has cost us a fortune. It's cost us a fortune in officer hours over God knows how many years. We've got flats and flats and flats all boarded up. No rent received for year after year after year. So what are we seeking compensation from Lend-Lease? Where are we with that? Because that's going to delay that whole project for another 5 years. In fact, it may delay it so long that the original planning permission, considering what's going on with Spurs, is now totally irrelevant and will all have to be redone again. So, I mean, there's a few points there.
Thank you. I'll try and come back on all of those points. Firstly, thanks for what you said about Tottenham Hale. That's really pleasing that that you're happy with that. Also getting good comments, I said, back from the community. Seven Sisters Market, in terms of it being the gateway to Tottenham, there have been lots of challenges with that project. In particular, the opening of the temporary market, which I mentioned, there's been a lot of delays with that. We've been working to support Places for London, but ultimately they are the deliverer on that. And we do have a big role in terms of lobbying TfL. There are money shortages. And I think that's been a real issue with the wider project there in terms of getting that moving and having that improvement work in place. So I do hear your frustrations on that. We still are trying to kind of push that forward. In terms of the railway arches at Bruce Grove, we had looked at an option of getting some heritage funding and money on that. We'd been successful in some other areas, but there isn't enough available to support with that. So it will have to be them as a developer that is delivering on that. It's not for the council to deliver on that or support that, because there isn't the money there. In terms of High Road West, so where we are, as you'll know, Lend-Lease have publicly announced their plans for moving out of Europe. So that's in the public domain. We've been working through what this means for the delivery of High Road West. They still remain our development partner. We're still in contract with them. So there's not very much I can sort of say about that at the moment. But I do also hear your frustrations. There's been a lot of delays on the project. One thing that we have been doing is in relation to looking at some of the properties which have been empty for a while, is looking at whether we can work with other council teams to support in terms of temporary accommodation, which is obviously a crisis that the council is struggling with at the moment.
Sorry, can I just add something?
Sure.
If that's all right. It's just on the first two elements of the question. I think in beyond, as I now already said, the importance of working with TfL on the long-term vision for places like Bruce Grove and Seven Sisters. There are some sort of complementary things that we're doing in the meantime, which I think we mentioned in the report. But the Future High Street Fund is a really important one. So That includes public realm funding for Seven Sisters. And that's at a sort of conceptual stage yet. We've not started delivering, but that together with things like the Business Crime Reduction Partnership, we do think will make a difference in terms of the sort of lived experience in Seven Sisters as the gateway to Tottenham, as you were describing. So there are some things we can do in the meantime while we work on the longer term with TfL.
So Doris?
Can I add my voice as well? I think the report is fantastic, actually, very succinct, etc. The overall picture seems very impressive. And there are some good stuff. I mean, just a little detail that the toilets on Brisk Grove are a masterpiece, actually, of regeneration. They're fantastic, but there are quite a few of that nature. I think the only problem we got, actually, is delivery sometimes and the delays and not explaining it very well to the public. I think if you look at the Wards Corner that we're talking about, you still got the whole thing there saying should be open last month, and it hasn't started the work on it. That type of thing generates a lot of comments of everything. So I think we have to get a bit better act on that one. And to a certain extent, there are things like these arches that John raised on. We got heritage money 20 years ago to do that part before, and they were opened after that previous generation effort. And now, it's just like empty, etc. So I hope nobody in English Heritage notices that they had paid before, for that particular thing, and give us again the money. But I think we have to be a bit more, I don't know, robust about demanding things from the owners, and if necessary, taking action and forcing them, because you can't have a prominent place like this looking the last 10 years the way it is. It's perfectly usable space. It's a prime location, everything around. So probably a bit more of that. But overall, I'm quite pleased with the overall program. I'll say I get frustrated a bit with the delays here and there on various projects. You referred to in the report to the things on the other side of the high road, the Page Green area, etc. These open spaces there. These years now, we keep on talking, we're doing plants, etc. Doing pieces, we're still behind, with them. Is that kind of problem? That's the only criticism. But otherwise, I think it's pretty good going. Yeah, I think we should be proud about our efforts.
Did you want to come back up on the point about the delays, or I think it might already have been kind of covered, but if...
Yeah, I suppose the point on delays, I think it is one of the challenges with these big placemaking projects, because they take place over so many years. And with the financial challenges that we've had for a variety of reasons, it then means if you have to reset a project or think about it, it becomes increasingly difficult to sort of realise it, I suppose, in the way it was originally intended. I think we probably could be better at communicating what we're doing, so take that point on board. What we've tried to do with Shaping Wood Green, and what we're going to be doing with Shaping Tottenham, is having a better communication strategy in terms of how we feed back to our partners and residents, both in terms of how we do that digitally, in terms of having dedicated spaces for doing that, but also having more kind of regular forums and opportunities for people to kind of discuss what we've been doing, and so that we can talk about some of the good news as well as maybe some of the challenges, and be very transparent about that.
Tammy?
Yeah, I just wanted to come back on the point about Lend-Lease. Are you anticipating that they will kind of sell their UK arm wholesale, or is it possible that it would be divided up, and therefore there might be less stability for the High Road West development?
As I said, I think it's probably difficult to talk about that in terms of much detail. Where Lend-Lease are with us at the moment is that, we're still in contract with them, and they, in terms of any sort of meetings or conversations that we've had with them, have re-emphasised their commitment to the project. Now, there are different options if we're not able to proceed with Lend-Lease, and the ones that you mentioned could be on the table, but at the moment that's that's not where we are.
Sorry,
We're going to.
did you have another question?
Yeah, it's on a kind. It's a smaller point, and it might sound kind of small, but I think it's really important. I picked up an issue a few months back where there was some seating in Seven Sisters round a kind of bandstand, and then basically what happened was that some of the there had been like reports from like the local community, I guess, that people had been kind of doing antisocial behaviour there. It wasn't clear what that was. And the police then asked the council to remove this seating, which was then subsequently done. And I said I didn't think that was a great idea, but it continued anyway. I guess when we talk about this stuff, I really think seating and having places to hang out can be what makes like a town centre have that feel. So I was really like shocked that that was something that the council were willing to do. Obviously, some people might sit there who, you know, are undertaking like drinking or whatever, but, you know, we don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater, if that makes sense. So I'm wondering, is there kind of specific moves to actually increase the amount of seating and kind of like reduce the amount of like hostile architecture that we see in our town centres, particularly in like central London, although less so in Haringey?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So some of the Livable Seven Sisters program I mentioned that would absolutely aim to do things along those lines. I think, yeah, I think we would agree with the point around the public realm not being hostile and a sort of a key objective of making town centres, you know, sort of friendly and accessible and useful for all. So I think that is absolutely part of it. I think that being said, there are probably times when the police raise concerns of such a sort of severity that then the council's forced to take action. But I think what we can do through good design of public realm is make sure that we're making places that are well used so that you're finding other ways to stop that antisocial behavior. So it's not about removing the seating if something goes wrong. It's about sort of having places that work in different sorts of ways, if that makes sense. I think another related intervention, I'd come back again to things like the business crime reduction partnership, which is how we can take different sorts of, again, interventions, you know, have someone come down and actually address the antisocial behavior as opposed to it always being the solution being that the seating just comes away. Is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, and I suppose there's some other examples of where we've been putting in new seating, such as in Downlane Park. And, you know, in terms of like thinking about that attention to detail, in terms of the quality of the materials and really thinking about how they're used. I was in Tottenham Hale last week and did like a full kind of walk around, and, you know, everyone was using that seating and those benches, and there were groups of young kids that had come out the school, and it just kind of shows you how important seating and other sort of interventions to our green spaces in the public realm are.
Back.
Yeah, definitely more seating and more toilets, I think, make areas better. And just a final point. So I know that there had been a plan around Turnpike Lane and doing some regeneration there, which I understand isn't going ahead anymore. I'm wondering, you know, you talk quite a lot in your report about the kind of very significant financial challenges that your team is facing. I'm wondering whether, you know, given the kind of projects that you've listed here, that you're kind of optimistic and confident that those will kind of survive the course of the next, you know, 3, 4, 5 years.
So we do still have something called the Turnpike Lane Improvement Plan. So that is about improving the public realm in that area. It's happily on the budget side of things. We've actually managed to get some of what's called the UK SPF, so Shared Prosperity Fund, which is basically the government's post-Brexit funding stream, which pays for this sort of thing. So we have some money from that for shopfront improvements in Turnpike Lane and some complementary public realm around it. And to your earlier point, one of the things that's looking at is I think the team did a disability access review of the town centre and looked at a bit of what the issues were and how to improve on the accessibility of the street in general and do that in tandem with improvements to the shop front. So that's absolutely on the program. And because there's UK SPF funding for it, actually we have to crack on with that and get on with it and spend it quite soon. So there's a bit of, with some of that funding, it's a bit of use it or lose it. So that's more the challenge there, is making sure that we deliver in time.
Okay, That's positive.
And just to add to that, I suppose to your wider point, I mean, there are budget challenges, you know, across the council. We're not the only council that is facing these kinds of challenges. So I suppose there is inevitably a process going forward in terms of looking at new placemaking projects, thinking about how we prioritise and sort of thinking carefully about that, and also thinking about funding streams. You know, one of the challenges with these large scale regeneration projects is you may get some seed funding, initial funding, and then you have to look at different funding options along the way. And I suppose projects where there's match funding that's required by the council becomes a bit more difficult. So, you know, it's something that's a very live issue that we're having to think about.
Thank you. Just picking up on that sort of theme, there's obviously an emphasis on securing external funding, and you mentioned how a lot of the time that comes with quite specific conditions attached. And I'm guessing that means that sometimes you might have to like slightly compromise or reshape the work that you were thinking of doing in order so that it can, you know, obtain that funding. So I'm just wondering, because obviously we have these really brilliant co-produced positive documents, but then I'm guessing you might sometimes have to slightly stray from some of those priorities. And how do you balance that? And I guess what's the sort of bare minimum that it would have to still match both criteria?
Yeah, so I mean, you absolutely touched on a live issue when it comes to external funding sources, and that does happen. So ideally, it just aligns with our objectives, and that is sometimes the case, but often we have to make some sort of adjustment to what the stipulations are of the funding. So GLA good growth funding is a good example. We've had successive rounds of that. That's largely aligned, and they'll set a sort of flavor of the moment and say we really want to deliver workspace schemes. That might not be the top council priority at that time, but we can make sure we deliver that alongside picking up some of what what we want to see in town centers. And then there are examples where it's much more challenging. So for example, recent government funding streams leveling up, those were sort of set for really specific reasons and had really specific challenging conditions to meet. And we were still successful in getting that. So I think we wouldn't be bidding for funding if it didn't deliver against one or more of our objectives. And, we would look at the manifesto, the corporate delivery plan, our strategic policies and procedures. We'd go to all of that first to look at sort of what to prioritize. But in terms of your question of what's the bare minimum, I suppose we wouldn't be applying for funding if it didn't hit at least some of that. And what we often have to juggle then is some of the other onerous conditions that you mentioned are around things like match funding, like Anna said, or certain timelines that we can't hit. So that sometimes happens. In those cases, actually working constructively with the funders, you can often mitigate that. So sometimes they can be more flexible. They can allow us to deliver different things. They can also deliver on different timescales. We often can work around that. It's rare that it can't be worked out in some way. But yeah, it is an ongoing challenge, I'd say.
Thanks. And finally, I just wanted to ask about capturing and measuring impact, because obviously a lot of these projects are so multifaceted, and you can kind of record, this is what's been built, this is what's been upgraded, this is how much nicer it looks. But are there things that we try to measure to sort of get, actually capture that in some kind of data rigorous way?
So that's an ongoing challenge. I think what we have lots of, like you said, is we have really clear evidence. Often because something is externally funded, you have to go back to the funder. So it means that we do really robust evaluation of those projects. But because the funders all have different things that they're after, you're kind of doing it to suit what they have funded. Whereas on our end, it can be difficult sometimes to get, for example, an overall sense of what someone's perception of Tottenham or Wood Green is. One of the things we're really keen on doing is through things like Shaping Tottenham and Shaping Wood Green, getting that qualitative information from people, how they perceive their town centres, or through things like the resident survey, making sure there's questions in there about your local areas and how you feel about it. And an interesting thing that comes from that is you often get positive perceptions of schemes such as Public Realm or others that have been delivered in a place, but not necessarily always linking that to the council delivering it or that being part of the council's regeneration programs. So you sort of hear a bit of, well, this part of Tottenham is looking better, but has the council improved my local area? No. So that's something we always struggle with, to sort of link those perceptions to the projects that are delivered.
So presumably that's also where the improved comms needs to come in.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, like Anna said, and through things like ongoing summits for shaping Tottenham, shaping Wood Green, going back and actually making it clear what we did do so that it is more linked to people's minds, I think would help.
All right, thank you both very much. I think we'll bring that item to a close and you're welcome to head off. So onto the fourth item. Rob, thank you so much for still being with us at this hour. Would you like to introduce the report?
Thank you, Chair. Save the best till last. I will actually ask my colleague Robbie McKnocker, who's the head of development management and enforcement, who's appearing on the screen, just to give you the headlines of the report. Hopefully the report is self-explanatory, but basically it's a Ombudsman complaint case, and the Ombudsman recommended that we report this to the Scrutiny Committee. So that's why we're here. So over to Robbie to give you the headlines. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob, and good evening, everyone. So the complaint of the Ombudsman findings relate to a planning application in Crouch End Ward. It was an amendment to a proposal that had been approved in a previous planning application for a front light well, and a front light well had previously been refused at the site. We received a complaint citing that an objection had been missed and some technical concerns with how the decision had been made. We recognise this in our complaint responses that there were a missing objection, but we find that the decision still flowed through and was correct. The complaint was escalated, went to the Ombudsman, who found fault. So their remedies were to apologise to the complainant for the frustration and disappointment and unnecessary time and trouble that this issue had caused, and review what had happened and decide whether we need to change our practice or procedures, whether we need any additional training for our team, and then report the findings to an Oversight and Scrutiny Committee. So since that decision, we have apologised to the complainant, and we've reviewed what happened and found some errors. So it was correct that there was an omission of the representations of councillors. There was an omission of a direct assessment of a very specific piece of kind of legality in the decision. And there was a drafting error in the report which wrongly described what was proposed, and the decision should have looked at the previous refusal and compared that, because that was an important consideration of the decision. But we did find that despite all these flaws and issues, the decision was still the correct decision, and we didn't feel it was beyond the legality of what planning allowed. So to remedy those errors, we've reminded officers to make sure they analyse all objections, and we've made sure this is part of officers' induction, so that they're fully aware of that. We deal with 3,000 planning applications a year. It happens very, very rarely, but did in this case. And we've had a team of barristers come in and give us some training on the legalities of amendments to planning applications, which happened earlier. And the final remedy was just to report these findings to the Scrutiny Committee. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Do any of my panel have any questions or comments? Yeah, Dawn?
Can I just ask if the planning permission?
Sorry, I said Dawn.
Oh,
you next.
I just wanted to pick up on the remedies, because there's not much we can do about what has happened. And that this was picked up in a meeting on the 5th of September this year, and it'll be an induction in new staff. Will there be regular refreshers just to check in on me that people are still up to date or still remembering? Because when you do something over and over and over again, it's very easy sometimes to forget what you're doing in the process. And I know you said earlier, Rob, about the number of applications and how speedy you are. There's 3,900 a year, you said, and they get turned around. Is there a lot of pressure, and it would maybe, this isn't going to be popular, slowing down a little bit, or just double checking those, or having a peer review every so often help just to make sure that these kind of mistakes don't happen, because human error does happen. It happens where I work. But I'm just trying to think about both the staff and the perception of residents, because there are some perceptions that aren't necessarily positive about planning.
So we have a fortnightly catch up as a team with officers, and that's an opportunity just to keep reinforcing key messages. So the piece of case law in this application is something that's still quite live and hasn't been settled. So things like that, the training will keep that in people's minds, and we'll be watching that and keeping an eye on that. The sort of human error side of things, I think you're right, just needs reinforced every now and again, and those meetings are an opportunity to do so. In terms of speed and that side of things, my point was more, in the year of 3,000 planning applications, this is probably the one time we missed an objection. Absolutely. It is very rare. The team work under pressure, but do an excellent job of considering all of the points raised in applications, and we see a very low number of these escalated to the ombudsman, and very low findings of fault when benchmarked against other authorities, and we have won a national award for Planning Authority of the Year. So we feel we have a really strong service, and that this was just an unfortunate error that happens very rarely.
Just out of interest, has the planning application actually been implemented now, or is it just laid on the table and the applicants not done the work?
So interestingly, the permission expired before they had implemented it. So they've then resubmitted for a further approval. So that was obviously made without the errors of the previous decision, and the outcome was the same. So whether they implement it or not remains to be seen. But they've allowed 3 years to pass without doing so.
Not quite clear. So is there still a current permission in force, or is it all lapsed now? So have they applied again?
They've applied again, yeah, to get a second permission.
Okay, and that's to be decided is still.
That has been approved. So they have they have a permission that has expired, which is subject to this complaint, and then they've come back in, and they still have an extant permission that they could implement.
Yeah, for the benefit of the ombudsman, I feel that the actions that have been taken to remedy this are all very reasonable and proportionate. And I guess my only question was just in terms of picking up human error sooner. This might have been what Dawn was getting at, really, but if someone has made a mistake or accidentally omitted something, and it is a resident or an objector pointing that out, are we quick to respond to that and check that over? How do we tend to sort of go about that?
So I probably should say that there are checks and balances in place. So if an officer makes an error, that there is a team manager reviewing the report, who could have picked something like this up. Unfortunately, they didn't. But there are sort of reviews in the process in terms of keeping on top of these things. If there's a pattern of errors, there's good chances to feed that back and just remind officers of things. So that checking process is a pretty quick feedback loop to officers of issues in their assessment and things like that.
Okay. Oh yeah, sorry, Rob.
Thank you, Chair. It sounds like you were possibly about to close. I just wanted to make a few other points just to close off. Councillor Barnes did mention a peer review. Do we do peer reviews? So we did one in October last year. and Cabinet approved an action plan in March, and we're currently implementing the actions from that. We've completed most of them, and we will be getting the peer review panel to come back to us to check how we're going, and we will report that back to the Strategic Planning Committee, which is the committee that sort of looks at our processes and things like that. So yes, we do a peer review, and we'll monitor that. And it's also worth mentioning, sort of separate to this, but there's an internal audit of planning going on at the moment as just part of the regular audit that goes on. So those reports will go obviously to the appropriate audit committee, but we will also take that to the Strategic Planning Committee as well to be transparent with whatever that comes out to conclude. We'll also bring this report to the Strategic Planning Committee too, for the councillors at that committee to have a look through, in the interest of being fully transparent as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. Yeah, I don't think anyone here can really answer this, but I'm just kind of surprised given how many ombudsman complaints are upheld against the council that we haven't had anything worse than this come to this panel before. Maybe it gets sent somewhere else when it's worse. I don't know.
Maybe it's because it was a specific recommendation of the ombudsman that it came to the scrutiny panel. I bet they don't all have that in.
Yeah, well, interesting. Anyway, I think we've considered it. Yeah, all right. So bring that item to a close. Thanks very much, Rob. Sorry it's so late. So that brings us on to the next item, which is items of urgent business. I don't think we have any. Yeah, so are the panel members content that we have maybe a separate short meeting online, a private meeting, just to discuss agenda and desire or not for a scrutiny review and these types of things? Does that sound okay? I think we often tend to just discuss it in a rush when everyone's really tired, so it might be good to just have half an hour online instead. So that just brings us to future meeting dates, which I think are slightly different to the ones that were published.
Yeah, so very quickly, so we've been asked, so usually the panels go through the budget in the December meeting, but the finance are bringing the draft budget proposal this year forward, so it's going to go to November Cabinet. So in response to that, we are going to, we've spoken to the chair of OSC and finance, and we've agreed that the panels will look at it in their November meetings. So some of the panels didn't have a November meeting, or in this case, we had one on the 5th of November, but the agenda was already full and we had external people coming, so I didn't really want to move it. So the long and the short of it is, sorry, can I just put this a second? Yeah. We are going to, specifically the 5th of November is the next meeting of this committee. And then on the 21st of November, we will go through the budget proposals and the MTFS proposals relating to housing and placemaking. The existing meeting that was in December on the 18th that we were going to do the budget, we'll just cancel that. So we haven't lost any meetings. We've just basically brought it forward a month. And then there is another meeting of the panel on the 6th of March. Does that make sense? So I'm reading it off. So in the dates on the published agenda are incorrect. They are incorrect because they were accurate at the time of publishing. Okay. But the 5th of November, bonfire night. Right, that's a normal meeting. The 21st of November, that's the budget MTFS. That'll be the whole agenda going through the budget. And then the 18th of December meeting will be cancelled. 18th of December. Cancelled, yeah. Yeah, and then 6th of March is the final scheduled panel meeting. Anyway, so I was just going to say, so for the 5th of November, what we're planning for the agenda is we have a number of representatives from housing associations that are going to come in and talk to us about, you know, some of their key performance data access, and then we'll have some time for questions. So basically the whole agenda will be having reps from some of the bigger housing association providers in the borough. So yeah, by all means, it would be helpful to have a Lib Dem maybe. Yeah. So. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for letting us know. Right, then I think that's everything. So bring the meeting to a close. Thank you, everybody. Oh, wait, no, I'm not doing that because I think we had a few actions and recommendations coming out of this meeting. I just want to make sure that we've captured those. There was a recommendation, well, they both came from John. One was about having a sort of in-person service for people to check that they, whether they want to stay on the housing register, etc. And there was another one around doing a review of the housing register as part of this review of the allocations policy, which they may already be doing because we didn't get an answer from Hannah on that. But in case they're not, we would recommend that they do that. Is everyone content with those two things?
Yep.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It was about downsizing. Sorry. It was about having an in-person place you could go. Yes, right sizing. And then there were a few action points for further information and clarification, which I'm guessing you picked up.
Got all.
Okay. All right. So that is it. I'll bring the meeting to a close. Thank you.
Thank you.